Welcome back to the second session of our 6th annual Professional Development Series at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Annual Legislative Conference. This partnership between CBCF and NMA serves to advance the mission of both of our organizations and has become an integral part of the conference for healthcare professionals, physicians, legislators, and all who promote health equity. This evening's session will address one of the many important issues that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the forefront, the importance of diversity in clinical trials. As one of our organizational priorities through Project Impact 2.0, the NMA recognizes the need for increased research in communities of color and the diversification of not only participants, but investigators as well. Women of color are particularly underrepresented in trials of disease states that disproportionately impact them. I look forward to this evening's conversation of these issues and the role of advocacy and policy in increasing greater inclusion of individuals of color in clinical trials. It is my honor to introduce a true champion for this issue, Dr. Doris Brown, the 118th president of the National Medical Association and CEO of Brown and Associates, LLC. She is a medical oncologist who has conducted, enrolled patients, and participated in clinical trials. Most importantly, she now serves as the lead for Project Impact 2.0 for the NMA. Dr. Brown.
I'm Dr. Doris Brown, Principal Investigator for the National Medical Association Project Impact, which stands for Increased Minority Participation and Awareness of Clinical Trials. The NMA for many, many years have been concerned with the lack of minority representation at all levels of biomedical research, particularly in light of scientific evidence suggesting that ethnic and racial differences in disease progression and treatment. NMA is dedicated to increasing equitable minority participation, including women in clinical trials. Today, we will have a blunt, open conversation, a really kitchen table discussion about ways we can promote clinical trials within the African American community through greater awareness and understanding of the importance of clinical trials and how to increase and facilitate an active role of African American physicians, especially women physicians, in all aspects of the clinical research process. Our focus is to assure the development of clinically meaningful data that informs providers and patients of the effective use of innovations in medical care, be it treatment or prevention. In other words, show me the data that this medicine, this therapy, this treatment is right for me or for my patients. Additionally, the session will discuss kitchen table discussion, the extremely important role of consumer or patient advocacy, and propose policies necessary to achieve greater inclusion of African Americans and other underrepresented physicians and consumers or patients in clinical research, based upon legislation that is being proposed by Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of New York and Robin Kelly of Illinois. Hopefully this session will enlighten and strengthen the resolve of those promoting and encouraging clinical trial diversity with an emphasis on women's health. While we speak generally about barriers to underrepresentation, we must also address barriers to underrepresentation of women in clinical trials. A recent study that I just looked at today, reported by the American College of Cardiology, outlined some of the barriers to women in cardiovascular disease clinical trials. Data shows low representation in trials for congestive heart disease, coronary artery disease, as well as pulmonary arterial hypertension. And these data are really no different for all other underrepresented groups. So Project Impact emphasizes developing solutions to clinical trials, particularly the leadership of clinical trials, including designing and conducting those trials, the site selection, eligibility criteria, certainly addressing the social determinants of health, and particularly looking at those end users where those drugs or products are being targeted. Data management support is also important, and other enrollment barriers to increase clinical trials participation. So without further ado, let me introduce and let us hear from Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. Congresswoman Clarke hails from Central Brooklyn. She feels honored to represent the community that raised her. She is the proud daughter of Jamaican immigrants and takes her passion for her Caribbean heritage to Congress, where she co-chairs the Congressional Caribbean Caucus and works to foster relationships between the United States and the Caribbean community. She is chair of the Homeland Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation Subcommittee under the jurisdiction of the House Committee of Homeland Security, and was co-chair of the powerful Energy and Commerce Committee during the 116th Congress. Congresswoman Clarke has been a member of the Congressional Black Caucus since coming to Congress in 2007, and today chairs the Immigration Task Force. As a representative of the 9th Congressional District of New York, Congresswoman Clarke has dedicated herself to continuing the legacy of excellence established by the late Honorable Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman and Caribbean American elected to Congress. In the 116th Congress, Congresswoman Clarke introduced landmark legislation which passed in the House, the Dream and Promise Act, H.R. 6. This legislation would give 2.5 million dreamers temporary protected status and deferred enforcement departure recipients a clear citizenship pathway. She is a leader in the tech and media policy space as co-chair of the Smart Cities Caucus and co-chair of the Multicultural Media Caucus. Congresswoman Clarke believes in smart technology and that it will make our communities more sustainable, resilient, livable, and work hard to ensure that these communities of color are not left behind while technological advancements are being made. She is one of the co-chairs of the Congressional Caucus of Black Women and Girls, which develops programs to support the aspiration of Black women of all ages. Prior to being elected to the United States House of Representatives, Congresswoman Clarke served on the New York City Council, representing the 40th District. She succeeded her pioneering mother, the former City Council member, Dr. Una S.T. Clarke, which made them the first woman-daughter succession to the New York City Council history. Congresswoman Clarke is a graduate of Oberlin College and a recipient of the prestigious APPAM Sloan Fellowship in Public Policy and Public Analysis. She and Congresswoman Kelly have partnered on a bill to increase clinical trials diversity.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent New York's 9th Congressional District in Central and South Brooklyn. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Brown for her lovely introduction and dedication to the issue of minority participation in clinical trials. I'd also like to thank the entire team at the National Medical Association and its president, Dr. Rachel Villanueva, for coalescing so many passionate and knowledgeable individuals for today's critical and crucial discussion. For too many years, the past year and a half in particular, we've known medical breakthroughs and scientific achievements have saved the lives of countless people globally. Let's be clear though, at the foundation of every scientific breakthrough is a clinical trial. Clinical trials are a critical step that allows us a degree of reassurance and certainty in the efficacy of medicines and the science behind the breakthroughs. They're not optional, they are quite necessary. And despite this truth, the current state of clinical trials in the United States of America does not even come close to accurately reflecting the people of the United States. Racial and ethnic minorities compose close to 40% of our population. However, they make up anywhere between 2 to 16% of our clinical trials. Black Americans are 5%, and Latino Americans are at a mere 1%. These figures cannot continue. They lead to outcomes worse than their shortcomings. From researchers to subjects, diversity is perniciously absent from many facets of clinical trials, and real people are not receiving the treatment they deserve. Adverse drug effects are devastating diverse populations whose unique genetic distinctions are not even taken into consideration. I believe we are all in agreement when I say it's time for clinical trials, which play such a fundamental role in sustaining our lives, to actually consider our lives. Let's just take a look at the prevalence of uterine fibroids in women of African descent. As many of you are aware, uterine fibroids are non-cancerous growths on the uterus. However, did you know they are among the most common gynecological conditions in the United States? Well, living through my own challenges with uterine fibroids, I invariably think of the millions of marginalized women who possess little to no means for treatment and can access no solutions for their pain, just suffering in silence. Today, approximately 26 million women and girls in the US between the ages of 15 and 50 suffer from uterine fibroids, with more than 15 million experiencing what is classified as severe symptoms. No group is more adversely impacted by uterine fibroids than Black women, who are twice as likely to develop fibroids than Hispanic women and up to 4 times more likely than white women. Black women get them at a younger age, deal with more and larger tumors, and experience harsher, more severe symptoms. So that's why I've introduced H.R. 2007, the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Uterine Fibroid Research and Education Act. Not because I believe our country should dedicate adequate resources towards uterine fibroid research and education, but because I know it's essential that we do. And in all good conscience, we cannot continue to ignore the millions of women who suffer from an illness as debilitating and pervasive as uterine fibroids, full stop. Too many diagnoses result in avoidable hysterectomies, and the health, safety, and well-being of 26 million women and girls hangs in the balance. So we must not let them down. Ultimately, the key to effective treatment of this affliction lies in the diversity of the subjects in clinical trials that must include Black women who are overrepresented in the population of the diseased, but are least likely to be involved in clinical trials, as many diseases like this are not adequately accounted for when creating universal cure or treatment. Human, racial, ethnic diversity must be reflected in the pool of subjects given the diversity of our population and must be the hallmark of every clinical trial within our health and making sure that our future is secure. People of color have been and continue to be underrepresented in clinical research. Thus, it's critical that we make up clinical trials in real-world populations and that we can be assured of the efficacy of the treatments for all mankind. We know better, so we must do better, and everyone in our community must receive proper care. We can and we must do this work of ensuring that our diversity is acknowledged and respected in the research and medical community. And it is paramount that we do not back down nor sit down, and we do not allow ourselves or our mission to be deterred. Having worked alongside numerous organizations and individuals dedicated to the health and well-being of minorities, minority women, and families, it's time for us to get to work and get the job done. So let me say thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay strong. And if you haven't already, get vaccinated. But most importantly, take good care. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Doris. And my name is James Powell, and I am the past principal investigator for Project Impact. And it is certainly my honor to moderate this kitchen table discussion. And we have a lot of very, very qualified and esteemed speakers, panelists that we're going to involve in this discussion. And I'm not going to go through an extensive reading of bios, but we're just going to spend most of our time having our discussion. So I'd like to start off and get us started by introducing you to Dr. Erica Marsh. Erica is Associate Professor in Obstetric and Gynecology and the Division Chief of Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility at the University of Michigan. And thank you, Dr. Marsh, for being here. Now,
thank you, Dr. Powell. Happy to be here.
Yeah, now the way I want to do it, I want to just get us started with asking you a question. You're a physician. Now, you've been involved in clinical research and academia, and in fact, you're one of a relatively few minority physicians involved in clinical research in a big way. And then the question is, why do you do it, and why do you think it's so important that we're talking about this now?
That's a great question, Dr. Powell. And my reason is pretty straightforward and simple. I do it because I think it's critically important that we're all represented in medical literature and represented in the evidence that we use to treat patients. In my field, a lot of the data that we use that we consider normative is largely based on women of European descent. And we assume that it applies to all of us. And in reality, we don't know that to be the case. And so I think, on our journey to health equity, we have to first be seen. We have to first be present in the literature. We have to be present in the medical evidence. And so a key driver for me is just making us visible, and doing so by making sure that clinical research includes all of us.
Before I leave and go to the next and talk to the next panelists and introduce them, there's one particular point that right now is on the table is this new regulation or new policy, or new laws that's being developed. And it seems to focus on issues of women. Could you say anything about that? Do you have some experience with that?
Absolutely. I mean, the main, I don't pretend to be aware of everything, but I do want to certainly speak to the incredible work that Representative Clark is doing with the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Uterine Fibroid Research and Education Act of 2021. This proposed legislation will provide $150 million to the National Institutes of Health. Those funds will largely be directed toward fibroid research. As somebody who does research on fibroids and sees the impact of that incredibly prevalent disease on women every day, I think that it's a critically important and, quite frankly, long overdue piece of legislation. For those of you who aren't familiar with fibroids, they are non-cancerous tumors of the uterus About almost 9 out of 10 Black women will have them by the time we reach the age of 50. Now, not everybody will have symptoms from them, but they'll be present on ultrasound. And I'd say about 30 to 50% of individuals that have them will have symptoms, so much so that fibroids continue to be the leading cause of hysterectomy in the United States. Now, this is a benign tumor, so more than uterine cancer, more than cervical cancer, more than ovarian cancer, this benign non-cancerous tumor is a cause of more hysterectomies than any of those cancer diagnoses. And we have to rethink that and reframe that. And it really begs the question, if fibroids were as prevalent in men, as prevalent in other populations, would we be sitting where we are right now, having the same discussions that we're having? Who knows? But the bottom line is they are highly prevalent in women across the board, and particularly highly prevalent in women of African descent. And so I am ecstatic about that legislation. I think it's going to be, a game changer for how we think about the disease, how we address it from a molecular level all the way to a community level, because I think we have to address it along the whole dimension of healthcare, not just in the lab, but in the clinics, in the homes, in the neighborhoods, in the communities as well. So,
okay, thank you, Erica. And we're going to come back to the issue of women in clinical research in a little while, but I want to bring in Dr. Rogers Kane. Now, Dr. Kane Rogers is a practicing physician in the community. He's a registered pharmacist and has been a principal investigator in many clinical trials of new drugs and held many leadership roles in the medical community in Central Florida. And welcome, Dr. Kane. And let me start by saying, being a community practitioner is hard enough. So what made you start doing clinical drug trials, and why do you think it's important for minority patients to participate?
I'm going to comment on that, but I got to respond to one thing that Dr. Marsh, Erica mentioned, and that is, if it had been men that suffered from that, what would the consequences, or what would be the what direction would we be moving in a lot sooner? And I can tell you, if it had been white men, and at the risk of sounding too politically volatile, is the fact that it was Black women that I think that negated the response that we're getting now, and we hope to get even more so. That if that had not been in Black women, it would have been something addressed long time ago. So, with that being said, I can't answer the question. What got me into clinical research was many moons ago, probably about 18 years ago. I began to address some of the pharmaceutical sales rep that was coming to my office, okay, none which looked like me at the time. And I began to address them selling the drugs that they were pushing at the time, pushing the drugs that they were selling at the time, in which they were trying to get me to write for various drugs. And then I started to ask them, well, where's the information that shows the efficacy in African Americans? And not one single pharmaceutical rep could give me that information. I mean, I can recall the drugs that I asked about at that time. And because they couldn't give it to me, one of the scientific, what is it? The pharmacologist or pharmacist that goes around and check the sites and stuff. One of those guys said, well, Dr. Kane, we don't have many African-American participating in these trials. I said, well, that needs to change. And they said, well, what can you do about it? And at that point, I decided that I would go into clinical research and do something about it. And very successful, not one of these, but was very successful at recruiting African-American patients. I can give you examples of some stuff, but that's not what we're here for right now. Very successful at recruiting African-American patients. And I knew that one of the reasons was because, well, several reasons was because I looked like them and I was their physician. And the ultimate thing that I did say to them, I promised them at the time that if I would not use this drug, my mama, sister, brother, son, daughter, if I couldn't put them in that clinical trial, that patient would not be in that clinical trial. And so I got a lot of satisfaction in terms of being able to identify, certain drugs that we participate in the clinical trials with, including the shingles vaccine that these people thought we could never get anybody. And it took me we recruited them so fast that they had to send somebody down to my office to legitimize, was I doing it correctly? And they sent them on 2 occasions. And so inside 3 weeks, we got 40 participants for the clinical trial at that time. I can go on and on, but one of the main reasons is I could not relate the clinical information that these sales rep was providing me to the patients and the people that I serve. And because of that, I said it became my problem at the time to make sure I found people for which I can legitimately enter into a clinical trial and then legitimately be able to refer or recommend to my patients those medications.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for being a part of the panel. It reminds me, and I apologize for interjecting here, but the way I got clinical trial diversity started where I was is I sent a vice president into one of these sales into one of these physicians' office, and they asked him the same question. And that's how we got our clinical trial diversity committee started, because he couldn't answer the question. He was embarrassed that he couldn't answer the question. But anyway, let me go to our next speaker, because I really, really want everyone to hear from Karen. Karen Peterson is a founder and chief patient advocate of Karen's Club. She's a stage 4 triple negative breast cancer survivor and a founding member of the Patient Community Council at Foundation Medicine. As I said before, there's a more extensive bio for all of the speakers made available to you online, but I really would like everyone to hear from Karen. And so I'm just gonna start by asking you to tell your story and how you came to be an advocate for African-American participation in clinical trials.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. I really appreciate the introduction and being here with this esteemed panel and to share. I got into patient advocacy after being saved through a clinical trial. My life was actually saved through a clinical trial. I was diagnosed stage 4 triple negative breast cancer in 2017, around between January and April of 2017. And my original team didn't value my voice. They didn't think a clinical trial was an option for me, and I needed one because the standard of care had failed me. And at the time in 2017, there was no other treatment outside of chemotherapy for triple negative breast cancer. And so I was like, well, this makes sense to me. It failed me, standard of care, so let's think outside the box. Let's think differently. And so I went out and sought second and third and fourth opinions and took all this information back in regards to clinical trial and in regards to genetic testing and genomic testing. And my original team just shot me down. They didn't think anything I said was valuable. And I had to walk away from my team because they were actually shutting the door on an option. And it wasn't a viable option. I was trying to make an informed decision in order to save my life. And it was so hurtful because I'd gone through stage 1 triple negative breast cancer. I'd survived that. I'd been with my team for 2 years. I trusted them. And here I have it. They're standing in front of me saying, you should exhaust all standard and conventional care. And if that fails, then we can think about the things that you want to do. And it's like, but wait a minute, hold it. I have a voice here. I have valuable information. I've been out, I've vetted the researchers. I've gotten second and third opinions. What do you think about that? And it wasn't until I revealed who I'd been talking to that suddenly my voice became valuable. And it was such a slap in the face. And it was so disheartening. I just divorced the team and I just moved on my own. And I, partnered up with the researcher and Luckily, she taught me about my genomic makeup of my tumor and helped me make an informed decision. I just didn't wake up and roll over and go into a clinical trial. I was very tactful and very strategic because I was swinging for the heavens. I only had a 4% chance of survival. And I knew I wanted stage 1. I knew I wanted to try something different based off of science, based off my genomic makeup. And luckily for me, I was able to fight my way through. I found a clinical investigator who was doing trials on immunotherapy based off the mutations that I had, based off my higher mutational burden, based off the fact that I had these fighter cells that were on a coffee break. He identified all of that, and he said, I have something coming down the pipeline. It's not been listed on clinicaltrials.gov yet. Are you interested? And I nearly jumped out of my skin. I was the very first patient in the nation to sign up for the trial. I have no formal education. I'm self-educated. I'm, skeptical. I'm not really sure if this is going to work, but this is the only chance I felt I had making an informed choice based off science. I started the trial on July 30th of 2017, and 8 weeks later, my very first scan, it was revealed that I had a 72% reduction, and by 2019, I was deemed cancer-free, and I haven't been on anything since. I'm one of the very few triple-negative breast cancer patients in the nation who I'm going into my 5th year of survival, and I think it's like 20% of us, and it's so low that survive stage 4, and so I feel like being a patient advocate becomes natural because I felt like I went through all of that and I gained all that knowledge so that I can share it with others, because not everybody's built to be an advocate. Not everybody should have to be, but I have this information. I understand strategically how you should move, the questions you should think about, the sequences of events that should happen in order to get yourself a seat at the table, to create an opportunity for you to survive. And I'm just paying it forward through my brand new nonprofit, Karen's Club. So that's pretty much my story in a nutshell.
That is a story. Yeah, we need to. That is a story.
Thank you.
The thing about it is, you had guts. You recognize that you are in control of your life. What do we need to do to get that to our people? What do we do? We need to inject some Karen into our folks. How do we do that?
I think it really starts with acknowledging the mistrust, because I think we all hear about it. We've been hearing about it for a long time. You've been talking about clinical trials diversity for a long time with Project Impact. And it's always, everybody, it's in the news, it's farmers talking about it, researchers talking about it, doctors are talking about it. But it's a real tangible thing. And mistrust and distrust of the medical community amongst patients formulates our plan when we think about what we want to do. You can't make a decision when you're distrustful. You are stuck in that moment and you won't take action. And so we can do all the sound bites, we can have all the surveys and the feedback, but if we can't actually have the awkward conversation and say to pharmaceutical companies, you know what? I sat on the steering committee for a triple negative breast cancer trial. And I can remember I was the only patient, I was there with all the doctors. The pharmaceutical company was there, and it was like, why can't we just have somebody who's on the site who deals with, mental health? Because mistrust, distrust, it's all a feeling, and it's real, and it can't be like just shoved to the side. It can't be just like, oh yeah, we understand that you don't trust us because of the atrocities that happen, but just get over it. No, it's a real thing. It will cause us to not make a decision, not have a conversation, not make a move. And so I think really, really, really ingrain that in the practice. Really ingrain that, having that conversation. And if we have a staff member, if you're partnering with nonprofits, if you're having a support, okay, we understand that there is mistrust here, but how can we move forward? Because this is an option, a clinical trial that you might want to think about. And then comes the conversation, and the education comes with that. But trust and education have to come together. But the mistrust and the distrust part, A lot of times, like I said, it's just a 30-second sound bite. People talk about Henrietta Lacks. They talk about, and it's like, oh, they should get over it. And it's like, it's a real, tangible thing. It really is in 2021. It really is.
Let me challenge a little bit because, you know, and it's not really challenging because I see too many people say that we don't have enough minority in our trial because they mistrust the research process. When I think they're using it as an excuse. Okay, they didn't invest the effort. They didn't talk to the right people. They didn't do what was necessary to get to people and say, this is what clinical research is about. What do you think?
You're referring to the pharmaceutical companies, right?
I'm saying to there's whoever's sponsoring those trials. I'm not just saying pharmaceutical companies. I know people, I've talked to people in academia say, well, we can't get them to do it. And some of them on further challenging them, they sometimes say they're not equipped to talk to these patients sometimes, you know, across cultures.
I asked the question just to make sure that the listening audience, because I don't know who our audience is, to be quite frank with you, to make sure that they understood that you were referring to the people that were sponsoring and you know, performing the trials, whatever it may be.
Right,
not
that's
the
correct.
patient. Okay.
Not the patient. No, not the patients. Yeah.
I feel like it's up to the pharmaceutical company to stand up and go, all right, let's be brave about this. Let's, you know, in every single site, it starts at the top. Have somebody on staff. You can have a clinical coordinator. You can have all this data, you know, people pulling data. You can have all the nurses and the doctors. But if you don't have somebody there, a mental health professional, a partner with a nonprofit to deal with the conversation that needs to happen about mistrust, nothing is going to move forward. It's still going to stay right where we are right now. We'll be having this conversation 20 years from now when it's really, really simple. We're not trying to send people to the moon. We're having a conversation. And it's an awkward conversation that only happens at the kitchen table. A lot of times when the doctor asks you how you feel, you're not talking about, you know, I don't like you and I don't trust you and I think you're going to use me as a guinea pig. You're talking about, well, I have an ache or a pain. And it's basically opening up that conversation, having a real conversation about that. Because like I said, it will keep people, keep patients from thinking about the fact that, yes, I can trust the process and yes, they have safety measures in place and maybe this is an option for me.
Well, you know, go ahead, Erica. I'll comment afterwards. Go ahead, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you, Rogers. It's interesting. I mean, your comments, Karen, were incredibly moving and powerful. And again, I have to do this again because you are a walking miracle. But I was struck when you talked about how you had to fight to get a seat at the table. And I was thinking, well, it's her table. It's her kitchen. It's her, like, why does she have to fight to get a seat at her own table? And I think that's part of the lens that we need to reshift. I think a lot of investigators are not even, and healthcare providers. I mean, this goes beyond, it includes research and trials, but quite frankly, as an issue in healthcare in general, aren't even aware that that's an issue, that your ability to be trustworthy and to present yourself as a trustworthy individual matters. Your being able to to make sure that the patient understands that you care about them, not just that you're seeing them, but that you care about them matters. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And, in the words of my 98-year-old grandmother, a lot of it starts with home training, and we can't fix that. But what can we fix? I think drugs have to be ultimately approved to be used. And I think if there was if there were more of a mandate of diverse inclusion in these trials, then I think a whole lot of companies would figure out a way to get their trials diverse. I think we saw some of that with the COVID vaccine, that there was a very active, when the federal government was putting billions of dollars into rapidly developing a vaccine, there was a very active mandate for most of the developers to make sure that the vaccine was being trialed in diverse communities. Now, did everybody do it right? No. And that led to its own set of challenges. But I think that the idea that, hey, we want a vaccine that works in everybody, not just this part of the community, was highly prevalent. I don't know that was relayed to minority communities well, and explained to minority communities well, but we ultimately got a vaccine that is effective, that was trialed in diverse communities, and that is effective. I think that the idea, though, is community, because yes, that one-on-one interaction is critically important, but I think engaging community in these discussions and building trust by partnering with communities is invaluable, because most of us don't live in a vacuum. We live in neighborhoods. We ride buses. We go to houses of faith. We talk to one another. And if you partner with communities and say, this is what we're trying to do, how do we do it? How should we do it? Is it okay to do? Have we convinced you that it is worth doing and it is the right thing to do? Or should we not be doing it? Because that's an option as well. I think the power of the community voice is very much underutilized, and it's important. And it can help when, again, when done in a equitable, respectful way, it can really help build the trust, particularly in the setting of a trial, that is needed. In the same way that Rogers had instant trust with his patients. They knew him, they trusted him, they knew he cared about them. If you do that at a larger level, within communities, that too can help build your trustworthiness as both a provider and a researcher and a trialist.
Well, let me put a little that's my segue into what I wanted to say, and that is, it starts, and I don't know who made the diagnosis, Ms. Peterson or Karen, who made the diagnosis of your breast cancer and the issues that were going on with you or ongoing at the time. But what I will say is, as a primary care physician, what I had to do was lean into the fact that the patient trusts me. And if I did not talk to them like I do on an everyday basis about any of their medical illnesses, they have a voice with how I treat them. And if you don't lean into listening to your patient, trying to deal with what's ongoing with them at the time, you might have had the stage 3, whatever stage the breast cancer was. You may have had that, but you also had other issues going on. And we had to look at you as a person, look at the overall effect, not only what the breast cancer has, but other ongoing issues. Could have been a child, could have been a parent that had dementia, whatever it might be, and encompass you as a total patient in order for me to be able to relate to you your ongoing concerns and to try to get you to participate in a trial that I am expecting to benefit you, not benefit society, even though it will. That's not what I was looking for, and that's not what I am looking for. I am looking for what can benefit you as a patient, what your concerns are. You're a human just like I am, and there's some issues that I need to address outside that cancer. I need to address those issues before I can gain enough trust to send you off to Never Never Land, to participate in clinical trial. Obviously, I did most of mine at my site. I wanted it at my office so the patients could have that level of comfortability. But again, you have to address you as the individual, and that usually takes your primary care, and primary care can be OBGYN, pediatrics, the primary care model is who will probably make the difference in participation in clinical trials.
I got about 100 questions. I know we're not going to get to it from all of the stuff we just talked about, but I want one point that I want to bring up is that we say in Project Impact all the time that every physician can't be an investigator, but every physician can know enough about clinical research to be a resource to their patients about participation, to know enough about it. What can we do to involve and incentivize? Do we have any ideas on our kitchen table how we can do that to get our physicians of color to at least be a part of the process? Okay.
You wanna, I open it up. I think most people will tell you that Dr. Kane he doesn't mute his words. Not saying they're the best words, but don't mute them. Truth be told, as much as I hate to say it, it wasn't my rationale, but truth be told, green, since you're talking about color, green, money makes a difference with a lot of people. Now, that's not to say that physician will trade the trust with their patient for a dollar. What I am saying is that, for them to take the time out to be able to deal with a one-on-one situation in lieu of their practices and everything else that they got in everyday medical practices, they need to have a means by which to continue working, i.e. to pay their bills at home, to pay their bills in the medical practice, and so on and so on. Now that is usually incorporated into the studies. It's just that a lot of people don't realize that. I'm not trying to say anybody should get rich, but I am trying to say that if you're going to take the time out to deal with the individual, you get rewarded for it. And when I say rewarded, I guess I should be saying you will get paid so it can cover your expenses, because you got to keep the lights on. You got to keep the employees paid. So usually, if it's a fair reimbursement for the time that you take to perform these services, most physicians that really give a damn, excuse my language, that really care about their patient will don't mind participating. I know it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I think Dr. Powell, I sent to you a presentation that addressed just that.
Yeah, well, one thing I want to do is ask Karen what she thinks about that as a patient. If you know your physician, because a lot of physicians, I talk to them and they're concerned about their being paid and patients finding out about that. I don't know if that's always true, but at least I hear that.
From a patient's perspective, it should always be, is the trial right for you? Because not every person is a great candidate for a clinical trial. So it's really partnering up with those pieces, whether it's genomics, and you have to have a genomic test in order to get into the clinical trial, whether it's don't understand in education and sort of partnering up with a community-based organization that help you to speak about that, the support group in the clinic to present. And, it's right there in your hospital. Go to the support group and say, can we present? Can we talk about this trial for a lung cancer that is partnering immunotherapy and the common cold virus? I heard about one. I talked to a researcher. There was, her name is Dr. Maynard. It was in NYU in New York City, and 47% of the people who had cancers, it was advanced cancer that was non-surgical, it couldn't be removed. The tumors were reduced in the phase 1 trial by 47%. 47% of the people had their tumors reduced, excuse me. So I thought that was really large for a phase 1 trial. And I said to her, how many people of color were in the trial? And she said 1. And that was a missed opportunity because we as people of color get diagnosed with lung cancer at an advanced stage, which cause for worse outcome. So it's like, well, how do we bridge the gap here? And it's just about going into that, you're here at the clinic. Oh, we have a support group for lung cancer. There may be somebody there who may be a great candidate, but they may not know about it. They may be afraid to talk about it, even if they don't know about it. Go to where people are. Meet us where we're at.
So the primary care physician can be a role in facilitating those kinds of things, at least, even if they're not the person to do it, they at least know.
Exactly. They're making the introduction like we always do. We always make the introductions. Why can't we do it there?
Right. And I agree with you 100%, Dr. Powell. And that is, it should start at home like a lot of things. And if you're going to see a physician, maybe I'm just talking about myself, and I'm not just talking about myself, but we have to be cognizant as physicians that based on prior experience and knowledge, sometimes no knowledge, of clinical research and what has taken place in the past, we have to make sure we educate our patients about those processes and discuss with them about those processes, and make sure you let them know that you don't have all the answers, but that you're really trying to do what's best for them, regardless, and be upfront. Tell them, I get XYZ number of dollars for this trial, and I mean, I didn't participate. I had a trial that was actually just looking at 2 drugs, both of equal of equal response in terms of the disease state, but one created diabetes 50%, as opposed to the other one was only about 15% that the trial participants would develop diabetes. If I enter patients into that trial, regardless, and it was randomized, whatever, if I enter patients in that trial, and if I only saw them once, I still would get $15,000 at the end of that year, per patient. And I chose not to do it because they had the other drug that would lead to 50% chance of developing diabetes. And I just went, that was my mama, my sister, my brother. I want to take the minimal, adverse effect route that was, being noted at the time. So I chose not to do it, but that was a lot of money.
Yeah, I would like to pose a question to Erica, because I said I was going to come back to this, and this I think is an important issue. Since her patients are women, and women, in my history, men don't come to the doctor unless something's falling off or they're bleeding to death. Okay, all right.
Or something ain't working.
And they generally are involved in the decision making for their families. What can we do to get more women and investigators involved and physicians involved in the clinical trials process? Because I think if we do that, we get more women involved in clinical trials, and we get more families involved in clinical research. Because I think those things go together.
I agree, James. I just want to comment on the last discussion, because I think it was before I jump into that, because I think it was a very important one. The only reason to ever do trial work as a provider is for your patients. Is for the better, is because you ultimately believe that that this is information, it's data that's going to help improve the delivery of care. I certainly understand and agree with Dr. Kane's comments in terms of, we can't expect providers to lose money to do a trial, but participation in trials, engaging in trials is not and should not ever be about making money. It's about doing what's right for the patient and getting the answers that we need so that we can counsel our patients appropriately, that we have the data that we need. And when somebody asks us, if a patient asks, how many Black people were in that trial? How many women were in that trial? How many men were in that trial? How many people from Latinx communities were in that trial? We can offer that data and say this percent, this many, none, and at least be transparent about the data. But I think the key point is having people being able to engage people into trials in that trusted space that Karen was talking about. And that's a very privileged space. People, particularly people who are already sick, are very vulnerable. And so you have to be able to look in the mirror as a provider and say, I'm doing the right thing. I'm maintaining the appropriate amount of equipoise. I believe in this trial and the way it's designed, which speaks to when you ask, what can we do? What can we do to recruit and engage more people and change the face? I think there's a face of these trials. A lot of it is educating ourselves as providers, is making sure that we as providers understand what a phase 1 versus a phase 2 versus a phase 3 versus a phase 4 trial is. Making sure we as providers understand what a randomized controlled trial is, what a placebo is, when is a placebo appropriate and when is it not appropriate.
Right, exactly.
Because, and I think too many of us, we get a little bit of that in medical school and a little bit of that in residency and, maybe a little more in fellowship, but most of us are far from that space by the time we're in our routine of seeing patients every day. So I think what the rapidity and intensity of the COVID vaccine taught a lot of us is that I need to understand this better. I need to be able to answer these questions better. I need to, wait a minute, is phase 1 safety or is phase, is phase 2 efficacy? What, we should be able to answer those questions just like this for our patients, and we need to feel comfortable. So I would say one thing to do is really make sure that providers, particularly those who are not engaged in research on a routine basis, have some way of staying connected to, this is the basics of clinical trials, and this is why they're important. This is why they are indeed necessary, and not an extraneous part of medicine, but convince us that something is working and is not working simply due to chance, but because the statistics and data are behind it. Now, having said that, the fields that make up clinical trials are not particularly diverse. We need to start recruiting more people, more people from diverse backgrounds to be statisticians, to be epidemiologists, to be pharmacists, to be clinical trials designers, because we all bring the diversity of our lived experiences to to everything we do, whether it's seeing a patient or teaching a class or designing a trial. And when you don't have that diverse perspective, when you don't have that person in the room saying, wait a minute, we're designing something that has 10 visits, maybe we need to think about that and the impact that's going to have, the differential impact that's going to have on certain communities. We're requiring sites to have a certain kind of freezer, or what does that mean in terms of what sites can actually do the trials versus sites that cannot do the trials. Having that diverse lived experience allows you to bring that diverse perspective to the discussion. That's not always about the science, but it is about who we are, how we're socialized, who we trust and why, and who we don't trust and why. And that voice is just as important as the science, because if you invest all this money and put this trial out there and don't have a diverse cohort of people participating, then I think companies are learning that's hurting their own market. Even if they don't care about folks as human beings, they're like, wait a minute, I'm not getting this much of the market share if I don't create a drug that I know works in this community versus this community. So, you know, I think most companies want a drug that works in everybody, that is effective in everybody, at least they should. And to do that, they need to bring diverse teams from the sites of recruitment to recruiters to the folks that are designing the trials and designing the drugs themselves. And I think when they do that, we'll see some of the improvements and changes that we need in clinical trials.
I want to summarize that real quick if I can, and that is diversity. If you want diversity in subjects, you need diversity in terms of investigators, period. You know, and when we look at the diversity in terms of participation in the subjects, you know, white folks represent about, well, at least at the time that I gathered the data, represented about 67% of the population, but they represented 83% of the people being a research participant. African Americans represented about 13.4% of the population, general population, but only 5% of the research participants. And when it came down to Hispanics, that was even worse. They were 18% of the population and represented less than 1% of the participants in clinical trials.
And one of the things we always talk about is we have to have representation at every level of the process. We're not just talking about patients.
Yes.
We're talking, and we've advocated, and Dr. Marsh, Erica, you're on the radar screen, because we need to get people into advisory committees and everywhere in the process at the regulatory agencies. But one point that we can't leave without talking about is, you mentioned mandate clinical trials participation, mandating diversity in clinical trials. What do we think about that? I have mixed feelings, but do we think there should be a law that requires a certain level of representation in clinical trials before a drug is approved?
I think so. I think even if it doesn't happen, there should be some accountability. Like, there's no accountability right now. You can say, yes, we have this unit. Yes, we have this unit set up that we're gonna go out and we're gonna recruit. We're gonna make this, effort. But there's no accountability. Where is the data that supports that? Where is the research that actually support that? You've gotten a grant. You've taken the money from the government, and here you have it. You're not even going into the community. The clinical trial is actually happening in a teaching institution that most of us aren't going to. And so it's like, how do you even bridge that gap? Let's talk about that. But the fact that, okay, we've got the money, it's happening in a teaching institution, and a lot of times there is no accountability, and no one is actually saying, okay, so here it is, you did this on X day, Y day, and this is why we don't have diversity, because this happened. Where is the research to actually say that they actually did what they said they were going to do? Where is that?
We'll see.
A number of the clinical drug trials are done by independent physicians, not in academic institutions. So what do we need to do? Because I'm always concerned about whether or not there's going to be inappropriate inducements to patients to participate. Especially people who are on the low economic scale. If you give them money, and I don't want anything, I don't want bad things to happen. I want to get the data, but I don't want bad things to happen to our community. Am I wrong in thinking that way?
No, I mean, I think history has shown us that bad things disproportionately happen to our community. So, James, you're not wrong for thinking that way, and it's not it's not necessarily just in our past, but I think the balance and the choice that we have to make is, do we want things that work in us, and are we in a place of such mistrust that we're willing to allow healthcare to progress and leave us behind because we're not engaging? And I think the answer to that has to be no. No, we don't want to do that. We absolutely value our lives. We value our health. We value the health of our family members, of our community. But you can't expect people to jump off the cliff when they can't see what's down below. And again, that's part of the the idea, of that, the whole shared decision making of the ideas of trust that we've talked about, and being trustworthiness, that of being trustworthy, excuse me. That's why that's so important, because those relationships, feeling that you're cared about, allow you to hear the risk and the benefits of participating in a trial, and to make an informed decision, which is what we want for everybody. That's what we ethically want. We want people to hear about the, to hear about the risk of, and hear about the benefits, make an informed decision, and feel that they're safe, and that there's no, regardless of whether they participate or not, there's no punishment, and there's no there's no coercion to do it. And I think if we get there, because we're far from there at this point, if we get there, we're gonna be in a better space. I don't know. I don't have enough legal expertise to say, should it be a law? But I think companies should be required to report racial and ethnic data in trials. I think that at a minimum should be a requirement, because if you looked at 70,000 people, but 1% look like me, that says a lot to me. Not only about the functioning on the drug, but how you see me and how you value me, quite frankly. Right. So I think inclusion should at least be required to be reported.
Well, I want to thank you, and thank you for your comments, and thank you for panel. Our time is up, even though I got 100 more questions. I appreciate all of the kitchen table discussion. Sorry we didn't have the macaroni and cheese that was requested, but I think we had a great discussion, and I look forward to further discussion in the future.